Stanley stared at his neighbor with avid distrust, as he wondered if Garrett might very well be pulling his leg. Garrett had been known to pull a fast one another in order to amuse himself at another's expense. He was not necessarily an asshole per se, but he did toe the line a bit when it came to his sense of humor. "So you're trying to convince me that you've seen a monster come out of those woods at night?" Stanley stated as he once more glanced nervously at the copse of trees which bordered the suburb in which they both resided as neighbors. They were sitting on Garrett's patio in the mid-afternoon drinking beer, and out of nowhere Garrett had burst forth with his bizarre confession. "I've seen it every night this week, Stanley," Garrett expounded as he beat his fist against the wooden arm of his deck chair. Stanley eyed his friend's tan, bearded face with nervous sympathy. But wouldn't someone else have seen it too? He tried to sound reasonable in case his neighbor was in the midst of some sudden mental breakdown. "That's the thing, man. I'm the only one out that late. I've been walking the neighborhood every night with Rudy." He motioned to the large shaggy mutt, which lay unmoving on the step despite his name being mentioned. "I haven't been able to sleep since Edna's mother moved in with us. She wants me and watches me like a hawk, so I had to stop my nightly scotch and soda." Stanley was well aware that this was actually Garrett's 3 scotch and sodas, and that they were mostly scotch. "Okay, so you've been out walking at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you've been seeing something come out of the woods. Are you really sure that you're seeing what you think you're seeing?" "It's about the size of a kid, around 8 years old. It's got great big bulging yellow eyes, and it's covered in scraggly stinking fur like a mangy dog or something." No offense, Rudy. The dog was obviously unoffended. It's male, I know, because you can see its junk." "And exactly what does this goblin thing do?" "It's going into people's houses, man. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It runs up to people's windows and then goes through the glass like it's water." "And what exactly do you think it's doing in their homes at night?" "Hell, I don't know, but it can't be any good." "Have you thought about seeing a doctor, Garrett?" Garrett stared at Stanley as if he had just been punched in the gut. "You really think I'm nuts, don't you?" His words were low, distant, and hurt. "What do you expect, man? This is the craziest damn thing I've ever heard come out of your mouth." "Get off my patio." Garrett's eyes were icy cold with rage. "Aw, come on, don't be like that," Stanley pleaded as he tried to express his genuine concern for his friend. "Just get the hell away from me. And if something horrible happens, you can just kiss my ass." Garrett stood and, grabbing his can of beer, marched through the open sliding doors of his house before slamming it shut behind him. Stanley found Rudy staring at him with a puzzled dog expression. "Look after him," Stanley told the dog as he patted him on the head and descended onto the lawn. That night, Stanley was awakened by the sound of the loud, angry barking and the angry cries of some person in the street outside his house. He looked over at his sleeping wife, who lay spread eagle and oblivious to the ruckus which was occurring outdoors. He leapt from the bed and, clad only in his flannel pajama bottoms, dashed through the living room and out into the front porch. He squinted into the darkness until he located the source of the disturbance within the shadows in the corner of his yard. Reaching inside the door, he flipped on his porch light just in time to see Garrett being thrown to the grass by a twisted, diminutive form. Stanley's eyes widened in horror as he glimpsed the disemboweled body of his neighbor's dog laying a torn heap of fur and red tissue on the freshly mowed grass. Stanley watched frozen with horror as the creature fell upon Garrett, snarling and tearing with the sharp hook-like claws at the tips of its humanoid hands. Snapping to his senses, Stanley dashed barefoot across the dewy front yard and, acting purely on the instinct to save his friend, snatched the creature and, braving the razor-sharp gnashing teeth within its protruding rat-like snout and mouth, locked its neck with his powerful construction worker's arm. He watched with amazement as Garrett jumped up and planted a solid kick into the exposed groin of the beast with a shuddering thud. Stanley felt the creature's body suddenly tense up as its growls became choking coughs in his unwavering grip. Seeing the demented rage in Garrett's eyes over the death of his beloved dog, he watched as this assault was repeated a total of 6 times. By the last furious kick, the creature had fallen limp and apparently unconscious in his arms. "You dirty piece of shit!" Garrett yelled through tears as he grabbed the thing by its throat and, wrenching it away, began to strangle it mercilessly. "I love that dog, you bastard! That was the best dog I ever had!" He was pounding the thing against the ground, and Stanley stood breathless and shaking as he began to witness the physical disintegration of the creature. Its skin was becoming loose and viscous as it seemed to melt beneath the force of Garrett's attack. Whatever bones the thing may have contained, they were softening into rubber, and in moments, Garrett stepped back as the creature finally deteriorated into a puddle of fur and soupy reddish-brown liquid mush. "What happened?" Stanley finally managed to whisper, after a light summer breeze dispersed the remaining scraps of grayish hair from the spot where the creature had lain. "We were out walking, and Rudy spotted him crossing the yards." Garrett's eyes were moist as he wiped his dripping nose on his denim sleeve. "I didn't have a good enough hold on his leash, and he took off after it. He got it, man. He was really giving it hell too, but the thing was too strong. Oh God, Stanley, it tore poor Rudy all up." Was it going in somebody's house? Stanley locked eyes with Garrett, who had suddenly grown silent. "No. He was coming out of someone's house, Stanley. He was coming out of your house." The two had stood for what seemed an eternity as they contemplated with rising paranoia what the ramifications of this new and horrific reality could mean. As the sun rose over the houses of the quiet suburb, they dug a grave near Garrett's rose bushes for his fallen pet. They remained together for the following day, and by late morning were hiking the trails of the small woodland which bordered the small drive of houses. There, hidden away in the woods by a small stream, was a cave, which neither had known existed. The crevice was barely big enough for a grown man to enter, but both were for some reason certain that this was the creature's door into their world. Dragging rocks and boulders from the surrounding hillside, they carefully covered the orifice and packed it down solidly with shovels. Both knew that this was probably an ineffectual action, but the need to do something, if anything, to ensure no further intrusions was paramount. They parted ways as the sun set and returned to their families, silent and morose. Stanley did his best to forget the events of that shocking and nightmarish morning. When he saw Garrett again, he had refused to indulge in further questions concerning the creature's motives or origin. Soon the men barely spoke to each other. It had been only a few weeks after his encounter that Stanley returned home from work to find his wife giddy with excitement. She met him at the door with unbridled joy and enthusiasm. "We did it!" she shouted as she wrapped her arms around him. "I'm pregnant, Stan!" she shouted as she bounced up and down with glee. After nearly a decade of unprotected marital sex, his wife was finally with child. He had smiled and laughed as he returned her embrace. Stanley stared with wonder at his sleeping wife as she lay exhausted after 13 hours of labor in the small hospital bed. The excitement and the strange, distant quality he felt from the present scene as he watched her deliver his daughter had left him unable to sleep on the hard cot brought to him by the nurses. He rose and approached the bed where he kissed her pale forehead and brushed the long strands of sweat-soaked back hair from her face. She looked the survivor of an apocalypse and the discoverer of a new paradise simultaneously. He quietly left the room and walked down the hallway in the opposite direction of the nursery. He paused in the waiting room and, placing coins in the vending machine, watched as a pack of cigarettes dropped into the trough with a plunk. He knew he could smoke in the lobby, but chose to leave the building and stand on the street as the first cloud of nicotine hit his brain in a dizzying wave of cool relaxation. "I am a father now," he thought, with a deep feeling of warm satisfaction. "A date had become a relationship. A girlfriend had become his wife, and now their lovemaking had caused a child to be born. He gazed up at the clear sky and listened as the cool autumn wind blew leaves and the tumbling, rattling piles of moving orange and brown through the gutters. This was one of those days that would stand as a marker by which he would judge all others, a milestone in his life which he would never forget. Back in the lobby, he took the elevator back up to the second floor. As the door slid open, he walked into the dim carpeted hallway and looked down towards the nursery. One more look, he thought, with a smile, and then I'll try to get some sleep. He listened to the stillness and wondered how everything could be so quiet after a day that had been filled with so much movement and clatter. He looked over at the nurse's station and saw to his mystification that the two young women were slumped over at their desks in apparent deep slumber. What the hell, he thought with sudden anger. Hey, he said as he nudged the girl's shoulder. She did not respond, but remained motionless, lump of white cloth and red hair. Shaking her from over the counter, he found her slumber unbreakable. A thin trickle of drool running from the corner of her mouth onto the forms spread out beneath her expressionless face. Are they drunk? He wondered, as he hastily walked to the windows of the nursery. He looked in and froze with sudden terror as his eyes traveled across each of the small, glass-encased bassinets. All the infants lay sleeping, wrapped in their blankets with tiny caps on their heads. But for the case which had contained his daughter. This is impossible, his mind screamed, as he ran down through the door and found it open. He rushed inside and looked around frantically as his vision continued to confirm what his brain was unable to accept. All of the newborns were present but his. He heard a noise from behind him in the hallway, and he dashed out to see the door of the emergency stairs closing suddenly. Sprinting hysterically, he slammed into the door and stood on the landing, looking down into the darkness of the stairwell. He could hear shuffling, padded steps moving down the stairs, and harsh whispers echoing from the shadows below. He began his panicked descent and almost plummeted as his ankle turned on its side on the third step down. He called out for the strange whispering voices to stop, but to no avail. As he neared the ground floor, he could hear the voices continuing further down. They were going to the basement. He bolted as he saw the door closing and rammed it with his shoulder as he entered the cold chamber. He was in the morgue of the hospital. He was surrounded by empty tables as he looked through the darkness at the wall of metal squares which contained the dead. One of the vault doors was open, and to his horror, he watched as a small creature handed a bundle of pink blankets he recognized as an infant swaddling up to another which hung out with one long, thin, claw, three-fingered hand extended. The beast looked up and met his gaze with its own horrifying reptilian eyes. It appeared a humanoid being the size of a small child, but the cadaverous, almost transparent flesh of its bony, misshapen, malnourished body was anything but human. He wanted to scream, but was frozen as his legs shook in the threat of collapse beneath him. The creature's face twisted menacingly as it sneered and took the silent bundle into its grasp like a bag of groceries from the market. It hissed something in a language he had never heard, with a voice that sounded somehow familiar, as if it were an echo from some nightmare which had awakened him screaming as a young boy. The other creatures scaled the wall and entered the dark metal chamber. The last, pulling it closed behind it. Snapping to his senses, he stumbled across the room and fell upon the metal face of the chamber, clawing desperately until his hand found the latch and opened it. He gazed inside and saw a small hole gouged into the back of the morgue drawer. Pulling himself inside, he pushed to the back and shoved his head through the opening into a tunnel carved through the hospital walls. He could hear them climbing and speaking as they made their way into the labyrinth of piping and concrete too narrow for him to follow. He began to scream and rip at the hole with his bare hands until the metal and stone had cut deep gashes into the flesh of his hands. Finally, he slid down onto the hard floor of the small chamber and wept in hopelessness. Then, as his mind and heart shattered simultaneously, he could hear Garrett's voice speaking, as if it was there, inside his head. It was coming out of your house.